Justin Theroux, you play Kevin Garvey on The Leftovers, which deals with the aftermath of the disappearance of about 2% of the world's population. What attracted you to the show and this particular character?
I thought the character, and again, I was only basing it on the pilot, but because the other scripts weren't written when I took the role, but it was, I really liked sort of the tension that character had. He kind of had no sort of places of comfort, and he was constantly uncomfortable, and I just thought that was going to be an interesting thing to play. I also loved just sort of the mystery, the way between Damon and Pete Berg, the way that they had kind of constructed it. It was this very sort of, if you think about it, obviously very sort of sci-fi premise, but it was grounded in this kind of very strange, almost verite, style of filmmaking, which I thought was interesting.
It's a very unusual show. A lot of mystery, a lot of secrets unveiled as it goes along. As you mentioned, you took the role based on the pilot, but there's so much more that happens after that. Of course, were you taken by surprise by everywhere that story took, the depths, especially of how dark that storyline was sometimes?
Yeah, I mean, I was constantly being astounded by the scripts that Damon was turning in. He's a great writer, and so. I sort of, at the beginning of the season, he had sort of said, "Look, I can kind of give you the rough beats of where you're going to go, and sort of the super arc of the first 10 episodes, or I can sort of leave you in the dark." And I thought for this kind of material, a lot of times if it's a film, you obviously know, sort of where it's going to end up in a sort of 3-act structure way. But this was kind of interesting in that you kind of didn't know. I liked kind of being the viewer in that sense of sort of like getting the scripts once a week or once every couple of weeks to sort of chew on and mull over, and then by the time you're sort of trying to put it there, you're kind of already shooting it, which is I think a really fun way for this particular kind of material to work, because there has to be a kind of suspension of like, I don't know what the hell's happening in my life either, for that character and for all the characters for that matter.
The show is based on a novel by Tom Perrotta, who's also, was the co-creator and also a producer on the show. Had you been familiar with the novel? Have you read it since?
I'd heard about the novel, and I haven't even. I started the book when I got all the materials, and I actually put the book down about 50 or 60 pages in because I thought the character was so different in the book that it wasn't really helping me out in that way. So I thought, I really should just go, not with the source material on this, I should actually just sort of adhere to what Perrotta and Damon had kind of come up with as far as, because they made some major character changes to him. He was the mayor in the original story, he's the police chief in the show. And there was a different kind of tension. He was kind of a slightly bubblier character, if you can believe it, in the book. So I thought, he's definitely not that in the show, so I should probably put it out of my head for a little bit. And also, I, again, sort of didn't want to I knew we were going to be sort of burning through the book in the first season, so I didn't want to strangely ruin anything for myself, ruin the discovery of where it was all going.
The series can be pretty emotionally grueling for the audience, and I imagine for the actors as well. And season 1, that's 10 hours of worth of material.
Yeah.
Is it hard not to take some of those dark emotions with you when you're off set?
No, I'm not really a method actor in that way. What I did struggle with was because it's nice to have a light set, and with the material that we were shooting, you couldn't really, you can't really be cracking jokes in the middle of it, or it was a very sort of quiet working set a lot of the times. So it was kind of a relief at the end of the day to sort of go home and goof around with friends and stuff.
Is there any way that you are able to unpack it, just sort of like throw on something really, really silly or funny, or do you find yourself binging on comedies as an antidote to this?
No, I usually would go. I just try and also when you're shooting, it's the enormous amount of material that you're having to generate every day. It usually was about going home and learning lines for the next day. So then on the weekends, I would just totally unplug and turn my head off and play Call of Duty or something.
TV production in general can be fairly fast-paced relative to film. So what was it like on The Leftovers? Is there, a lot of time for rehearsal or preparation, or is it just basically always jumping right into the deep end?
You kind of had to just sort of, just sort of jump into the deep end and, pull your parachute and hope for the best. It was. We had lots of discussions. It wasn't much time for a rehearsal. You kind of rehearse, they'd throw up the lights, and then you'd start shooting. But we had, Mimi Leader, who's one of the most wonderful directors, directed a bunch of them, and she's so good at sort of, taking the time at the end of the day to sort of talk about the next day's work. So it was a lot of conversations and then texts with Damon, who was in LA writing, and just making sure every time we'd get a script, we'd kind of sort of, I'd try and find Damon over the weekend and sort of go like, look, can we just sort of break down sort of, the themes you're sort of aiming at here, and see, just see what he sort of sent back to me, and then that was kind of sort of the overall guide, and then Mimi would, or whoever was directing that week, would hone in on it,
One of the interesting aspects of this show, I think, is that while it deals with a really extraordinary global event, it's focused very specifically on this, relatively small community. Do you think that more intimate focus, that local sort of sense, gives us a greater insight into how the world at large might deal with, something this cataclysmic?
I thought that was one of the smart things about the series in general, or the definitely the pilot, which was that they just chose to sort of zero in on this town. I think the minute you go outside of that, or if you there was one episode, the Carrie Coon episode, where she goes to New York, which I thought was fascinating and great. Where you sort of get to see where they sort of crack the door on the world at large and sort of show how like a city is reacting to it. But I think if you spend too long in sort of a metropolis, inevitably it becomes, something more like, The Road, or, it would become something that would become less grounded and more sort of sci-fi, I guess.
Almost immediately in that first episode, we fast forward from the event itself to 3 years after the fact, and it's not until late in the season, for instance, that we even get to see a little bit of what the characters' lives were like before the sudden departure happened. So there's a lot of backstory that's still sort of a mystery, things that we are yet to reveal. Do you get, how much guidance do you get from the writers or producers to try and fill in those blanks, or do you have sort of a working backstory in your own mind that you sort of refer to when trying to inhabit the role?
I think it's one of those things I spent a lot of time with Damon just sort of talking about. I really kind of wanted to know specifically the family dynamics, like, kind of what had happened to our family, how it had fractured, and then how my wife had gone off and joined this cult, and how, what my relationship was like with my daughter before and after, and my son, and how that worked, and all the backstory of basically what kind of happened, what was the splintering moment, and almost the more painful moment of like what was the next maybe 6 months like after the departure. That's the thing that kind of I was more focused on. Like I wanted to know. I didn't get too far back into his backstory, and I obviously wanted to know what my storyline was with my father and why he had gone insane and all the rest of it. But yeah, that was kind of that's the main focus of it. What it was for me, just from an emotional standpoint or point of view, it's just trying to sort of come to grips with my family, and also my sort of arguably terrible job.
Even with all the mystery and uncertainty with what's going on in the story, what happened, and all that, that might be nothing compared to some of the work you've already done in your career, like with David Lynch and Mulholland Drive and Inland Empire. Having been a part of things like that, does that sort of prepare you for anything anyone can throw you as an actor after that?
Yeah, I love working with David so much, and there are similarities between the way him and Damon work. They have a very different vernacular and vocabulary for spelling those things out. But one of the things that I loved, which is Lynchian in its just in its inception, is that sort of dream logic that Damon lays out. There's people call them mysteries, they call them clues, they call them whatever they are. But I remember oftentimes working with David, if you tried to get too sort of and go like, hey, so I know this is what's happening to me now, and now I think I'm going to go over here, and then in the next scene I'm doing this. So why am I, if you get too many whys with David, he'll just go like, I don't know what's happening, man. We're gonna find out, you know. Like, so he would go like, the character doesn't know, so you don't know, so let's just do that, you know, like. And I kind of loved that. It's a very liberating thing to do to an actor, to go like, don't worry about it, just stay in the moment, stay present. Every new piece of information you get is new anyway, so don't bother trying, you know. And I've often said that, you know, for people, it can be a more frustrating experience, at least with David and probably with The Leftovers, if you try and hang too much on small events or props or logic even. You know, David's, you know, it's the difference between listening to like a pop album or John Coltrane. You know, in a Coltrane record, you're not really looking for the hook, and if you are, you're going to be very frustrated by it. It's something that kind of lays itself out and is its own thing. And if you kind of relax into that, there's kind of it becomes a more pleasurable viewing experience, you know.
And that also must be a lot of faith to put in a writer and a director. You know, when you yourself are not sure, you know, exactly what's going to happen or exactly what is going on in the sort of the surrounding context. You know, you know, do you find yourself surprised by, you know, the end result sometimes on that?
Definitely. I mean, like when we shot Mulholland Drive, that was like we had a very good time shooting that movie. We laughed a lot. David's extremely funny. You know, it was almost like we were shooting kind of a comedy. You know, like we'd be giggling and, you know, and then when I saw the film, I was like, holy moly! You know, it's like such a different viewing experience than it was a shooting experience. And same thing with Leftovers. You know, once it's all edited together and you know, because you're also not seeing what the other actors are doing in their scenes. Once you see the score dropped in, you know, Max Richter, who's obviously beautiful composer, it completely changes, you know, what you thought you shot. You know, I find it. I mean, I really like it. I think if you try and sort of tack down a director or a creator too much on you start trying to bring the project to you, you can make it more boring. You know. In a weird way, you kind of want to surrender. If you know someone has a vision, which clearly Damon does and David does, you know, it behooves you to sort of surrender to their idea. If you try and impose your will on it, I think it doesn't work in your favor.
You mentioned the score, how significant it is into you know, creating the tone and the emotion of the show. I was struck particularly by, you know, a scene in I believe the season finale where you are rushing into the burning house to save your daughter, and how you know, much the music, the score really plays up the emotion in that scene.
Yeah.
You know, what was that scene like to film?
You know, it was. I remember thinking it was going to be just practically. It was going to be too quick because I ran it. We shot it in we shot it in slow mo, so it was a very quick kind of thing. I ran around and then I ran up some stairs and I kick in the door and I grab her and I leave. And I remember thinking like, wow, I find her pretty quickly, you know. Then and it's also some beautiful camera work by the two guys that were working the camera. Because they really had to do most of the heavy lifting, literally, you know, because they were on a steady cam and chasing me around, and we also had fire elements and things like that. So it was, you know, there was room for error. But yeah, that's a perfect example of like a moment where you think like, oh, this is just kind of, you know, I remember thinking, is this going to look kind of hokey, or is this kind of, you know, because when you have sort of, you don't have full fire, there's a little VFX, you know, when they put the sort of twinkle and the ash going through the air and stuff like that. That's another one of those scenes where you watch and you think, oh, that's much more impressive than I thought it was going to be. You know.
You play a lot of scenes on the show with characters in that cult group called, you know, the Guilty Remnant, and they've taken a vow of silence. What's it like playing scenes as an actor against silent scene partners where you're not getting that verbal back and forth?
Well, the frustration is, I mean, all the people who are, I mean, Ann Dowd, Liv, you know. They're all Amy Brenneman. They're all such great actresses that there's not a moment that something's not registering on their faces and being projected, you know, out at you. So in a way, it's interesting. You know, I mean, I think it's harder for them because, you know, they're, you know, instrument of their voice has been taken away from them, so that's hard. They have to play a lot of things with looks, and at a certain point, I imagine you think you're just, you at least feel like you were making faces or something. But it's a kind of a beautiful thing to watch the way they work, because they'd give you everything that a regular scene partner would give you. They just wouldn't be verbalizing it.
You mentioned Ann Dowd, who plays one of the leaders of the Guilty Remnant, and some of your most intense scenes are with her, especially later in the season, where there's that episode where you actually kidnap her during a blackout, and she actually finally breaks her silence to you, and you have this this incredible confrontation. What was it like getting to that point? Filming those one-on-one scenes where it's actually you're getting that charged back and forth in that episode.
That was a beautiful couple days. For a couple reasons, because we were in this sort of contained set that we shot basically in continuity, so we got sort of from the moment of me sort of discovering that I'd done it to the moment of her. It was just she's such a powerful and astounding actress that on the one hand, when you're doing your coverage, you're trying to sort of serve the scene or whatever, and then once they're doing her coverage, you're getting to sort of sit back, and you're obviously in the scene as well, but you're also watching just someone at the top of their craft, working seemingly effortlessly and giving this astounding performance. So it's also sort of a privilege just to be sitting in front of it, because you're going, oh my God, this woman is just incredible. Like she's such an incredible actress. So it was kind of an honor to just be watching her do what she was doing. Take after take after take.
Are there a lot of takes when you shoot the show, or maybe that particular scene had more takes than usual because of how much dialogue and how much intensity there was?
She pretty much we were working with about 2 or 3 cameras, I think, and she trounced it the first time, the second time, the third time, and then I think they just pushed in and got a close-up of it, and I think we were done. I think we had gotten it, but she was just, she's just a wonderfully prepared actress, who just works so beautifully.
There's a fine line between sanity and madness on the show, not just for your character, but many others as well, where we wonder, whether they're lying about things or insane, or maybe if they actually do have some insight into what's happening around them. How do you get into that headspace of someone who has kind of a tenuous grasp on reality?
Well, I don't know. I think you just have to play the reality of. Usually, for me, it was waking up somewhere, not knowing where I was, not knowing, and not knowing what I'd done, specifically, and having to play you're just playing discovery, So and usually that invokes a kind of panic, having, fainted once before. I remember waking up and thinking like, oh, this is it's an incredibly alarming feeling. So sort of recalling that, I guess,
The series has been renewed for a second season. Do you know when it goes back into production?
I do not know. I think I'm going to know shortly after Thanksgiving. They're saying they're going to tell me when we go again.
Well, you are, the show was a really intense show that, the Golden Globes are coming up, and they love new shows, especially. What are your thoughts about, potentially getting an opportunity?
I honestly don't dedicate much thought to it. I'm sort of more, it's not why I'm doing it, but it's all the cliches. Like, it would be great if they recognized it. I think people did incredible work on it, but I don't think it's not going to. Make or break our intentions for making the show.
I want to wish you the best of luck on that, potentially, and also the second season when you go back to film that and it starts airing probably next year. So thank you very much for talking with me.
Great. Thanks so much, man.